Have you ever been in a situation that was just so overwhelming you couldn't find the words for it? Well, today we're building a vocabulary for those exact moments. By the end of this, you're going to have the perfect words to talk about some of life's tougher experiences with, real confidence and clarity. All right, let's dive right in. So yeah, our theme today is the vocabulary of despair. And I know that sounds a little gloomy, right? But think of it more like an essential toolkit. Because having the right words for difficult stuff isn't about sounding smart. It's really about getting a handle on things and maybe even getting a little control over all that complexity. So that's the big question, isn't it? How can a few words actually help us get through these tough subjects? There's this old idea that to name something is to have power over it. So let's put that to the test today and see what we find.
We've broken this down into 4 parts. First, we'll look at words for public failure. Then we'll shift to physical destruction. After that, we'll explore the internal feelings of hardship, and we'll finish up with some of those, private, unsettling states of being.
So let's start with our first section, an ignominious end. These are the words you reach for when you're talking about massive failures, public shame, and the poor souls who get caught in the middle of it all. Okay, what's so cool about this slide is how these words can actually tell a whole story together. So just imagine this, a huge music festival, right? It was hyped up for months, but it just completely collapses into a total chaotic debacle. The organizers, they face an ignominious or a really publicly shameful downfall. Pretty soon their company becomes defunct. Poof, it's just gone. And of course, people everywhere deplore what happened. And you can't help but feel for the hapless or just plain unlucky ticket holders who lost all their money. You see how they all link up like that? All right, so from the ashes of a public failure, let's move on to a much more literal kind of destruction. Our next section is called From Spark to Ash, and it's all about the language of physical loss and decay. Now, this right here is a really important distinction. Combustion, that's the scientific process of burning, right? It's the chemical reaction happening inside your car's engine. But a conflagration, well, that's the catastrophic event. We're not talking about a campfire here. We're talking about a massive, raging inferno that's just destroying everything in its path. One is the science, the other is the tragedy. And sticking with that fiery theme, we've got consumption. Now, think way bigger than just eating your lunch. This is about the total using up or destruction of something, like the relentless consumption of a forest by that conflagration we just talked about. And what happens after? The sun might desiccate the landscape, leaving it completely dried out, totally lifeless. Both of these words just paint this incredible picture of utter depletion. Okay, so we've talked about disasters out there in the world. Let's turn inward now for our third section, the weight of woe. This is where we find the words for the internal experience of sadness and hardship. For instance, just thinking about a mountain of debt can feel daunting, right? It's intimidating before you even start. But actually living through something like a natural disaster, that's a harrowing experience. It's acutely painful and it leaves scars. At a funeral, you might hear a somber dirge, a song that just captures that collective feeling of grief. And in the aftermath of a big tragedy, a dearth of hope, that painful lack of it can feel like the biggest loss of all. And for our final section, we're really getting personal. We're looking at unsettling states of being. These are the perfect words for those private moments of unease, of discomfort, and those shocks that just shake you to your core. So the key here is being specific. Ennui isn't just being bored. It's that deep, soul-crushing boredom that comes from having no purpose. And that feeling can make even beautiful moments feel ephemeral, tragically brief. On a way more physical note, if you're stuck for hours in an incommodious or just an uncomfortably cramped airplane seat, you might end up with a literal contusion, which is just the medical term for a bruise. See? Each word captures a really unique type of discomfort, from the philosophical to the physical. Okay, this next word, it might seem like it doesn't fit at all. We're talking about all this gloom and doom, so where in the world does a word about surprise come in? Well, let's find out. The word is flabbergasted. It's that feeling of just pure shock, of total disbelief. And here is the connection. When a complete debacle happens totally out of the blue, you're not just disappointed, you are flabbergasted. It's that emotional whiplash you feel from a sudden, catastrophic failure. So, what are the big things to remember here? First, always know the difference between a process, like combustion, and a huge event, like a conflagration. Save debacle for those epic public failures,
and use ennui for that really deep, specific kind of boredom. But I think the most important thing is seeing how these words help us draw a line between what happens to us and how we actually feel about it inside.
Which brings us right back to where we started. We've just armed ourselves with this whole vocabulary of despair. But does naming our darkest feelings, our toughest moments, does that really give us more power over them? Does having that clarity lead to control? That's definitely something to think about.